You can do any. You can also share the whole screen.
Just share my screen. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties. We'll go this way.
Oh, look at that.
There we
Oh,
go.
what a beautiful slide.
Let's see. Beautiful screen. I know, aren't they beautiful slides? Sandy did such a good job.
Beautiful. Reminds me of the old soap opera, Search for Tomorrow. That was the opening credit.
Okay, well, it's good to see y'all and to be with all of you. So we're gonna pick back up in John 3, but actually before I needed to remember, in 2 weeks on the 13th, I will not be here. So if someone would like to lead discussion that night, let me know. I can work with you and talk about notes, or you can kind of lead it your own way, but we'll be in 2nd John that night. So just putting that out there if anyone's available. Okay, so I'm going to begin again, like we did last week, by reading 1 John 3 aloud. And I invite you just to listen to it. You, of course, if you need to read along, please do. But when this was written, there would have been a reader and the church would have heard it. So I'm inviting you just to hear it all at once. So Lord, as we hear these words, may we have open hearts and minds to receive your transformative words. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it does not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed. What we do know is this: when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. And all who have this hope in him purify themselves, just as he is pure. Everyone who commits sin is guilty of lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. You know that he was revealed to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him sins. No one who sins has either seen him or known him. Little children, let no one deceive you. Everyone who does what is right is righteous, just as he is righteous. Everyone who commits sin is a child of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The Son of God was revealed for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. Those who have been born of God do not sin, because God's seed abides in them. They cannot sin because they have been born of God. The children of God and the children of the devil are revealed in this way. All who do not do what is right are not from God, nor are those who do not love their brothers and sisters. For this is the message we have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. All who hate a brother or sister are murderers, and you know that murderers do not have eternal life abiding in them. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth, and will reassure our hearts before him whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we obey his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. All who obey his commandments abide in him, and he abides in them. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit that he has given us. The word of the Lord. So I want to start out just by asking, what stands out to you from this? Is there something that you hear about God? Something that you hear about us, disciples, God's people? A question or a wondering that came up? What stands out?
Stunning absolutism. It's all or nothing.
Mm.
I mean, it's like, this is an old man who's had it, and he just, you know, I mean, you gotta do something like that because it isn't even theologically sound.
No, right. Right.
I guess I was, along the thing I was kind of struggling with, I think we read last week, you know, that if anyone says he's without sin, you know, he's not really being honest with himself, because we all sinned. And then we've got this reading, you go like,
Yeah, exactly.
Night, it was like, yeah. So there's this whole, I've always found the book very somewhat disturbing, because it has these stark statements that's if you just kind of look at it, they seem almost opposite, or there don't seem to be cohesion to them. But yet there's such beauty in it at the same time. You know, like the starting part, you know, how great is the love of the Father lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. That's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And beautiful concept, beautifully written, and yeah, just beautiful.
But I agree with everything that was said, but also, where's the redemption? Where's the forgiveness? Where's the ability to go back to God, to, you know, to mend our ways, or to try to be good people?
Yeah, chapter 1.
Go back to chapter 1.
Yeah, go back. Yeah, no, it's, when you said that people, you know, just heard it, and if you know, more power to them, if they heard it and understood it upon first hearing, you know, I'm impressed. And then we've lost something in 2,000 years, you know, because I certainly don't understand it on first reading, first hearing. I don't understand, you know, I mean, you understand this line, you kind of understand that line.
Yes.
You kind of understand that line even. I don't understand how line 3 works with line 1. You know, if I was editing this guy's stuff, I'd just say, you have to go back and redo it. You're all over the map, you know? And yet, yeah, yeah. And yet there, like I said, there's some really great stuff in there, but, you know.
Nothing makes me want to look in a commentary harder than some of these paragraphs in here.
Right.
Like, what the heck is reflective thought done with this?
Right.
Which I don't feel I've had time here to, you know, to do reflective thought, isn't it? But I mean, maybe that's the point. I mean, when I said it's not theologically sound, but by that I mean, in the consensus of Christian thought, it doesn't, consensus of Christian theology, it doesn't quite fit. Now, and yet you trust that there's a truth to what he's saying. What does he mean in this context?
Or like, what's his idea of sin? You know, because he says, because he just said, you know, something about, you know, sin. If you say you don't have any sin, you know, you lie in chapter 1 or whatever. And then here he says, you know, if no one who is born of God will continue to sin, because God's seed remains in him. I'm assuming he's talking about the Holy Spirit there. He cannot go on sinning because he's been born of God. I'm guessing he's talking about some kind of willful sin that like, you can't go on cheating your whomever, once it has been pointed out to you that you are cheating, that there can't be some kind of willful, thing. That doesn't mean that you never, make a mistake or do something like that, but you can't do this sort of willful,
I don't care what anybody
sin.
says, I won't do it anyway.
Yeah, or like, yeah, I live with my, stepmother, but, whatever. Even though you pointed it out to me that I shouldn't, or whatever, sorry, that was Corinthians, but anyway, I'm just giving an example.
Yeah, exactly.
You feel like there's, like you don't know the context here. There's something missing in the context. It's like there is a life or death struggle going on in the church right then. It's not talking about casual sins like we might be thinking of, but I mean, he's throwing the words antichrist around in the thing. I mean, he's close to apocalyptic again. And I mean, from what I remember of commentators, they get into Gnosticism and so on here, and the whole sense of not understanding Jesus, not recognizing Jesus as he actually was, and then who knows what the implications in one's life are from that misunderstanding. And it may be, so he's identifying the people who are behaving in this way, that it's about to destroy the church, that is sin and they're not of God. That makes more sense than I had a bad thought sometime today, and so I don't know God. Well, okay. I mean, there's something deeper, there's something more on the line here than us casually reading it around the table.
I hear it as more aspirational, because I mean, this kind of absolutism reminds me of, if your left eye causes you to sin, plug it out. I mean, it's those extremes that kind of pull you in the right direction. Not that you have to literally live this way, but he's trying to pull you in that aspirational direction.
Right.
Yeah, because otherwise,
It's just, I mean, we know we've bumped into those kind of conversations along here where it says, well, what does it matter if I sin if God's just gonna forgive me? We know that idea is running around.
right.
So, and Paul has to jump on that one all the time about why it matters, and he goes a different track or whatever, but we know that there's this, and then we also know that down the road just a little bit, some people are gonna take this out of context and say, well, since we can't sin after we become a Christian, we wait to become a Christian until right before we think we're gonna die, because we might mess it up. And, they pull that out too. So we're not the only ones that have a little trouble with some of it.
Well, and then knowing what's coming in chapter 4, what?
Yeah, right.
What's that?
What is
You
that?
have to write that down.
Make sure to teach on that next week.
Well, it leaves you wordless. But I mean, chapter 4, I mean, I'm not meaning to get too far ahead here, but chapter 4 it's all fantastic, and which maybe we shouldn't have stopped at that chapter 3.
That's true. They don't have chapter breaks.
Right.
It's true. We could do the whole letter at once, and that would actually probably be better.
But we still would be lost at some of these points.
Yeah.
Starts to get overwhelming.
If you read one line, you kind of understand the one line.
Yeah.
And then you read another line and you understand that line. It's just that sometimes when I'm trying to look at it as a theological whole, kind of like, or put it up against some of the other earlier ones in there, but, I know some people though that talk like this and preach like this.
Yeah.
So there you go, Not you, I'm just saying, no, but, and there's a lot of what Eddie said about, aspirational, or I think a lot of this about sinning and the devil and stuff like that is intentional. It's intention, it's like you can't just don't let anyone lead you astray. You know, he who does what is right is righteous. You can't just say, well, you know, I can do anything I want because the blood of Christ covers me, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's definitely, that's wrong.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, these are clear examples of do not proof text.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
It's true.
Yeah.
it causes a big mess.
Mhm.
yeah, an even bigger mess and, yeah.
One of the interesting things from a lot of scholars and commentators is this thought that maybe this isn't actually to one church, but to many churches in Ephesus. And so therefore it may not be talking about one specific thing, but kind of in general, these are the types of things happening. And so I wonder if maybe that could be addressing, it's kind of, I don't know, I think about the way I would write, and if I'm trying to address multiple situations, it may sound like I'm shifting theology. Really, I'm just trying to cover everything.
Right,
Um,
right, or maybe these are all your greatest hits. You know?
True, that's
I
true.
mean,
That's
yeah,
true.
because any one of these small thing would be fine, you know?
Mhm. Well, I'm gonna propose for today that we're gonna break this up into 3 sections to kind of talk about and think
Okay.
about it in 3 ways. So the first one would be John 3, 1 through 10. And I'm thinking about that as kind of like our identity as Christians. So if we're looking at it that way, this writer is assuring the listener, the followers of Jesus, that they are the ones who come from God. And he kind of gives 3 reasons in these verses behind that. At the beginning, in verses 1 and 2, he talks about that believers really are the children of God. And he kind of revels in that status and says that this isn't something that can be taken for granted, and that we're not only the children of God, but that as the children of God, we've been given new life. I think the second reason he gives is right after that in 3 through 6. And he says that the one who remains in Jesus is not able to remain in a life of sin. And so that the way that we live, the way that people live, indicates their true identity. Who is their identity? Who is it in? And then his third reason in 6 through 9, about the church's identity, about people's identity, is that he contrasts those born of God with those born of the devil. And I'm going to be honest, that's a section that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. It feels like weird writing. It feels very absolute. I don't always feel like I know what to do exactly with that. But he says that a person's true father is revealed by their conduct. And then kind of wraps all that up in verse 10, where he says that we can know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. And I feel like as I read this, there's this desire from the writer to talk about, to help people, the listeners, understand that as the children of God, we will one day be like the resurrected Christ, and we will be made whole, and we will be made holy. And that this is a hope we can hold on to, but that this relationship with God isn't just about this relationship that we're going to have in the future. This is also about the relationship that we have with God right now on earth. So our present life as God's children. So my first question to ask is, so what are the warnings here? If we're the children of God, John goes into some warnings in this section in verses 1 through 10. So what is he warning the church about, and how does that strike you?
Don't sin.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Let no one deceive you. I mean, I think that
Deception.
this letter is just filled with the sense of someone is really trying to distort the gospel.
Mm.
Or I see it, yeah, and you know, when you have a movement that's young and you have a mixed bag of people
It's volatile, right?
that come
Mhm.
and join in. And as we know from other things, you know, some of them may have their own angles, edge, you know, what they're looking for may not be exactly, because people get, attracted to whatever's new, and we know that there's a lot of people that even could start out right and then decide, oh, well, you could make profit over here by just sitting doing this or this, or I could find power by, leading this or whatever. So you have this mixed bag of people, and he's trying to kind of sort through and say, no one who continues to sin has either seen him or known him. And I feel like he's not talking about those outside. He's talking about look amongst you. And if there's somebody who still going on this way or, didn't change much or whatever, even if he sounds right, he's probably not right. I think he's kind of giving broad strokes of who to look up to and who not to.
And I think your distinction between inside and outside is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No, thanks. But no, I think it's all inside. I think he's trying to help us figure out who in this mixed bag of Jews, Gentiles, church, whatever, to try to look through and say, this is how you're gonna know who is really children of God and who aren't.
Yeah.
And it's by the life that they live. And he's gonna say, because that's visible, and I don't think he's in any way talking about works righteousness or anything like that, like it's not, it doesn't matter what you think, it's just what you do. No, I don't think he's talking about that, but he's trying to help people see, decipher, exactly, help give you clues to say, okay, these are the people who are trying to be children of God, and these are the people who are probably not.
I wanted to say there, like, the fruits of the spirit are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They might have false life, but it says anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of God, nor is anyone who does not love his brother.
Mhm.
Or maybe there's some division.
At the risk of sounding really Church of Christy, I do like that he talks about sin as lawlessness. I think that we have, well, at least our church has a history of maybe sticking really close to rules and making rule books out of things. But I think that, I don't know, when I think of laws and I think of commandments, I think what I primarily think of with Jesus is love your neighbor, and love the Lord your God. And so I don't know, that's what that draws me back to immediately, is this. Who are we loving, and are we following those commandments we've been given? Anything else strike you from that section?
It's interesting because I'm looking at it, and it does feel like some people within the group are rising and saying like, hey, you follow me, you don't have to do X, Y, Z, you can be okay with it. And the rest of the people are like, hey, that sounds actually good. And, when Paul talks about following personality, right? Christ didn't crucify, and I didn't die for you, stuff like that. So I feel like early on, maybe what you said about following the law is becoming too hard, that people are looking for someone who is offering an easy way via breaking some of the laws, and still you'll be all right, So that's what came to my mind as he was speaking.
Well, that leads me perfectly into my next question. Thank you. I think to plant it. But in 9, it talks about God's seed, which I'm going to interpret as the Spirit of God. And I say I'll interpret, I'm stealing that from a lot of commentators and academics. But that the Spirit of God propels us towards the way of God and away from the brokenness of the world. And so, there we go. So what does a community, a church, however you want to frame that in your mind, look like when they reflect God, the Spirit of God? And what does it look like when they reflect the brokenness of the world? So that could be this community, or it could be other communities or things that you've experienced.
Well, I go back to Debbie's point about the fruit of the spirit. That's where I'd start.
Yeah.
If they're not striving for those things, nobody's perfect, you know, we don't make it. But if that's not the talk of the goal, if the goal is, you know, legalism or being holier than thou, or, you know, whatever, if the goal is something else, then that's probably not what you should be going after. You know, that's probably not reflecting of God.
Mhm.
It should be inviting, I think, because God is never not meant to be the one you are scared to go to.
Yeah.
If He is Father in heaven, you should not be scared to go and just talk about your difficulties or your what you're going through, whether it's sin or hard situation at home, work, etc. The community should not be the one to judge and throw the stone, you know, like it should be the one to be like, yeah, you know, we have sinned, so we can't pick up the stone and stone you. That's what I kind of, you know, was looking for when I left my old church, you know, and there were many conversations we had with Dale, Debbie, with, you know, like with Laconia and I, we had great conversations. Like it's hard to detach yourself from there, you know. There's always a fear of like, when is the other shoe gonna drop, you know, kind of a deal. So
Yes.
yeah, so it should be welcoming for sure.
The phrase.
But also the attributes of a family. The strengths and weaknesses of a family.
Mhm.
It's very human.
The phrase that I think has challenged me over the years is, are we a safe place? And I ask myself, the people in my life, do they feel I'm a safe person? And that's been a beacon for me. And I might be with people who I might even disagree with, or we don't see the world eye to eye. And I'm not just talking about politics, and I'm really not talking about politics. But they may believe in something that I don't. I don't have a construct for it in my life. But they trust me enough to tell me that. And if I judge them, then they might not be able to find as safe a place as I've found.
Mhm. Thank you.
The criteria it's that strikes me, and it falls kind of like a bad landing in a plane, just flat. You're a child of God when you do what is right. That's where your righteousness comes from. Doing what is right. That's your card. And it's not what you believe or how you believe, it's doing what is right. And this church in this last year has been blessed by doing what we felt was right. And that has been like a balm to us. It has protected us because we did what was right. And those that would attack us for various, you know, reasons, you know, based on what happened here, the fact that we felt with the Spirit's leading that we did what was right, I think really blessed us in the end. It protected us. It did, because once, you know, people were coming up at us with questions and accusations and things, the fact that we did what was right and what was right in the eyes of God and for everyone else, it was like a bulletproof vest. You know, looking back on it, we, you know, didn't know it at the time, but even going through it, we knew that doing the right thing is what the church is all about. And we saw that as an opportunity, and we did it, and we were blessed by it.
When I look at these questions, I think about like flourishing. Is there growth happening in a community or not? And not just like numbers or people necessarily, but like, is there growth in people spiritually and knowing who God is in a relationship with God? Because I think sometimes in church, there can even be a growing of numbers, but there's not necessarily growth in knowing who God is or being in relationship with God. And I think sometimes it's the exact opposite, because if you're truly growing, it's hard. Like being in a relationship with God is hard. And sometimes churches grow because they're giving an easy way out. I don't know. I hope that's not always the case, but I think it is sometimes. So, you know, I like thinking of the idea of flourishing and growth. New life, the mustard seed growing into a plant. Well, I'm gonna keep us moving because I just saw the time. That's my bad. But I really do love this image of the children of God. And I love the image of that children bear their family resemblance, and that you sometimes know who they belong to because of what they look like, or maybe what they act like. There's this joke in Kale's family, and I could say it, Kale's not even here. So, but you will often look over and Kale and his dad will be talking, and they'll be standing in the exact same position, or like sitting in the exact same position. And we always joke that, you know, it's just in the family. And so children are not perfect, they mess up, but that they know who they belong to. They know who their father is. That's not usually a question. And so I want to share this quote from Henry Nouwen from Life of the Beloved that I really love. He says, "We are intimately loved long before our parents, teachers, spouses, children, and friends loved or wounded us. That's the truth of our lives. That's the truth that I want you to claim for yourself. And that is the truth spoken by the voice that says, you are my beloved." Have any thoughts on that? What would say?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
You were.
Oh, you felt something? The challenge is getting back to that once your parents and teachers and spouses do your number on you, that you get back to that. But to kind of know that before all of that happened to you, that, you know, there was a place, there was a time when you were perfect, when things were perfect, before, you know, somehow life intervened. And that's kind of nice that you didn't begin with that. You know, this is in between, you know, God's purpose for you from the beginning, and you're just returning to that, back to that zone.
I think there's a lot of children, if we listen carefully to them, like maybe between 2 and 3, when they have more language, and they will talk about God in a way that they have a sense like
Like they've just been there.
Yeah, they've just been in connection with God. And so I like to think, although I don't remember, my earliest senses of God probably were like 5 or 6 that I remember. But I think trying to go back to maybe your earliest experiences of God might be a wise thing to do.
Yeah.
I was gonna pick up on the now and emphasis on love, and saying, yeah, I mean, you know, we see it in the next chapter even more, but it is here in this chapter. John always keeps coming back to love. So however stark some of those other sentences are, it's not that he doesn't know about love. And yeah, and you've got to know, especially when you read further into the letter, that he actually understands what love actually is.
Yeah.
So that, you know, again, I think that's what happens in scripture. You have to have a hermeneutical principle, you know, there's a lot of complication going on in scripture, but what is it that you interpret everything in light of? And one of them is love. And so you have to interpret some of these starker comments he's made in light of that.
I think also, I mean, the word children comes up again and again and again, and we all are children in our own ways, and over time we mature as we learn more and we understand more. Perhaps our maturity helps us recognize that love that's been there always, but as children, we were busy doing other things, right? We were acting like children.
Yeah.
I think Nauman's, to me, his statement is paradigm shifting. I'm thinking, intellectually, I believe what Nauman says. And it fits. And for me to know that I'm really loved before Dale and Debbie or my parents love me is really powerful. And what that does is it keeps me from becoming legalistic.
Mm.
If I know that I'm loved before anybody else has loved me, if I don't get there, then, and if I don't get there, I'm always gonna be looking at it from a legalistic standpoint.
Mm.
I'm not gonna look at it from the basis of love. I'll shut up now.
No, don't.
You're on a roll.
Shut up, baby.
And I love that, like, if we can accept the idea that we are created and as the beloved of God, that also means, kind of like Eddie was saying earlier, called you out, sorry. That we have a knowledge and a way to return to that. It's something that we've already known, and it's something that is innately a part of us. And I really love that. One of the other things that Nouwen talks about is he has this idea of what it means to the beloved. And he talks about that because our actions flow out of us, in order for that to be the healthiest they can be and to be from a place of true love without burnout. And so that we can love people well, it has to come out of a place of our knowledge of our identity as the beloved. So he says, if we are the beloved, if we know first that we're the children of God, that we are created and loved by God, then we know from there how to serve out of the overflow of that love, instead of serving for ourselves and then later trying to find our identity in that work. And I really love that idea, because again, I mean, and that makes sense. I mean, if you've worked with children or been around a child, right, when they are safe, when they know they're safe and loved, it changes how they act. It changes their ability to love and take care of people around them as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really powerful. So, okay, let's move on to 11 to 18. And so out of that idea from Nouwen, kind of this idea of once we know who we are, that affects how we act. And so I kind of see this as a direct application of, okay, we're talking about our identity here. So now what does that mean? So now that we know who we are to love one another. And John goes into that a lot here. So he talks about in verse 11, this idea that loving one another is a cornerstone of our faith. And maybe because of the season that we're in, but I read a lot of this in this lens of that maybe loving our brothers and sisters is especially important in the context of division, even within the church and within society. And so in verses 12 to 15, he kind of goes into this conflict between these two groups of identity, the children of God and the children of the devil. And so he talks about that we should anticipate being hated by the world, because not only are there these two groups, but a conflict exists between these groups, between the faithful and between the ones who don't believe in God. And what's fascinating to me is that the contrast drawn between these groups is not by who's doing right or wrong, but it's actually love. Love is the contrast between the groups. And so in verse 14, he says that the presence or the absence of love is what indicates our spiritual status. The absence of love indicates spiritual death, and the presence of love indicates spiritual life. So spiritually dead people not only lack love, they also hate, but it starts from love. So how have you seen the absence or presence of love in your own life as an indicator of your spiritual health? Does that resonate?
Can you say that question again?
It's all
How do you see the absence or presence of love as an indicator of your own spiritual health? Sorry, keep going. Just in your family? Is that in you with your family or in them or all of the above?
It's in all of them, and
they don't understand what this is all about. They don't believe in this, and so do. I'm the one that looks up to God compared to what I have at home, my relatives. They don't even know who God is.
Yeah.
And they don't act like they know who God is. They're tough. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you get into this, it's into your head, you'll know what love truly is. I grew up in a dysfunctional family. I didn't know what love was because nobody showed love.
Yeah.
Till I walked in these front doors 8 years ago.
You are very loved.
I know that.
Yeah.
I'm very, very grateful to have everybody there. I consider you guys my family in terms of the people that are truly my family, but they're not good people. And I tell them God sees all. So when their day comes of judgment, and God says, "No, you got the wrong door." That's the way I feel. Dealt with a lot of abuse, and this has changed me. Turned me into a raging lion, into a little pussycat. I love it. It's making me who I really want to be.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think I would, I could certainly talk about my family. Debbie and Dale know, when I first started going to Louisiana, Dale and Debbie would, predict that it'd take 4 to 6 weeks before I would recover from my depression. But would you agree with that? And I'd be down. And this last trip, I was in Louisiana for 11 days. And I came back and I gave it a score of 93. So but that's been a 40-year period of work.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge became for me when I started saying, what I really need to do is start treating my family the way I treat my friends. And that opened the world for me.
Yeah.
My brother still drives me up the wall. And I drive him up the wall. But when I think about giving him stuff, it'd be easier to do it with Eddie. It'd be easier to do it with Dale. It'd be easier to do it with Al. And when it comes to my brother, and then I said no. And then this was cool. I did something with him. I gave him something, and he said, "You shouldn't do this." And I said to him, "I want to treat you the way I treat my friends." And he got quiet, and I think he knew that that was different than anything that had ever transferred between us before. So for me, that's a barometer.
Yeah.
I think that's very wise, Laconia, but we often, when we talk about love, we go right to family where we expect to be loved or we expect to love. But I had an experience the other day. I was at Sloan Kettering for a checkup. And when I go there, I go with a great sense of gratitude for having been saved from a terrible illness. And I finish with my doctor. I walk down a hall. I get on an elevator, and this man gets on with me. And I think he was probably maybe an Orthodox Jew. And he looked at me and he gave me a thumbs up and a smile, like, "Are you okay?" And I responded with a thumbs up and a smile, and I said, "This place saved my life." And he said, "You and many others. I've been here since like 1989. And it wasn't just this place, it was God." And so really, it was an amazing experience because it was a reminder we're surrounded by love all the time and it comes from people that we've never met, will never meet again. But maybe that's part of the way love works, or maybe God works. And, here I am talking about it. And, it makes me want to cry. When I got off that elevator, I felt like I was so lucky to encounter that gentleman.
I could relate to that, John. I really. There's been instances where I've passed people and, same thing, like you said. Everybody's thumbs up. How you doing? You don't even know these people.
Yeah.
And,
But they care enough to ask.
yes,
Yeah.
They care enough to ask.
we've been blessed with a second life.
Yep.
Okay, I know it's 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna take 2 minutes and finish up the rest of this really quickly. Get out of here pretty close to 8. Thank y'all for participating in discussion. I love getting to hear and be a part of that. And so at the end of 18, there's just this idea that love offers life. And so just like Cain is this example of hate, Jesus is the example of love as he's sacrificed his life for us, and that we are called to do that for others. And this last section that we're not going to really discuss, but I'll just kind of briefly talk about from 19 to the end of the chapter to 24 is just back to this reassurance of who we are to God, that we have this identity of the beloved, and yes, we're called to live it out in this way, but we don't have to, we have confidence in who we are and in whose we are. And one of the things I really love in this section is at the very end in 23 and 24, it talks about this interconnectedness and this indwelling of God living in us, that we live in God and God lives in us. And this relates to our keeping God's commands. This relates to us loving other people. And so when God lives in us, that love flows out, kind of like we talked about last week, darkness can't live where light is. So I just really love that image. So I want to do a quick prayer as we close. I'll pull it up, and if you'll pray with me. Lord, we confess that sometimes there are more hard to love people who come to mind than ways to love the world around us. We confess that our propensity to hate like Cain is all too often a reality. But Lord, we want to live like you, to love like you, to lay down our lives like you. Shift our hearts away from hatred and drench them with your all-consuming love. Help us to love subversively. Help us to love in the face of evil. Help us to love in the face of hatred. Help us to love counterculturally. Help us to love even when we don't want to. Help us to love without boundaries. Fill our imaginations day in and day out of what love-drenched action looks like. Amen.
Good job. Thank you. Sweet